What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 and the Motorola Moto G Pure. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where we'll be linking to several other videos about each of them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Moto G Play, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Moto G Pure, we're getting a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display. This phone only has a 60Hz refresh rate, and then we're also getting a 720p resolution, a 270 PPI, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So as you can see, these displays are pretty much the same, and for what they are, I do think they are pretty good. Sure, they don't have 1080p resolutions, and they're really nothing special in general, but for more basic activities like web browsing, social media, watching the occasional video every now and then, and stuff like that, despite being nothing fancy, they will definitely get the job done. Really, the only difference here is that, again, with the Moto G Play, we are getting a 90Hz refresh rate versus 60Hz with the Moto G Pure, and honestly, in my opinion, this is really not that big a deal. All it's really going to do is make the movement on the screen when you're scrolling a little bit faster and smoother, so the Moto G Play is going to feel a bit more premium, but in real life, you're really not going to notice a whole lot, so I definitely wouldn't make a decision based on that. Now for storage, both phones have 32GB of internal storage, and of course, they both have microSD card expansion too. Now, especially for the Moto G Play, which is the newer phone, the storage here is pretty disappointing, because at this point in 2023, I feel like pretty much every phone should have at least 64GB, and I personally wouldn't get a phone that has less, because in this day and age, with stuff like the system, apps, and just files in general taking up more and more space, sure, you can always use a microSD card, but still, having storage on the phone itself is always a good thing. And again, 32GB just really isn't that much, so unless you have like 5 apps and you're really not doing a whole lot with your phone, the storage on these phones is going to fill up pretty quickly. For security features, both phones have fingerprint scanners right here on the back. And with the Moto G Pure, this phone actually does have Face Unlock, whereas the Moto G Play doesn't. I was kind of surprised by this, but honestly, I feel like most people use fingerprint scanners anyway, so unless you really want Face Unlock, I feel like it's not really going to make that much of a difference. But starting with the Moto G Play, let's give the fingerprint scanners a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Moto G Pure. There we go, one more time. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive, but again remember, the Moto G Pure does have Face Unlock, whereas the Moto G Play doesn't. Now for the camera setups here, with the Moto G Play, we got a nice looking hole punch design for the front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with the 16 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Moto G Pure, we got another 5 megapixel front facing camera. This one has a water drop notch, definitely doesn't look quite as nice, but it's still at least decent. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So for these camera setups, I wouldn't say either phone is really feature packed or anything, but that being said, the Moto G Play at least does have a macro camera, whereas unfortunately, the Moto G Pure pretty much has a regular camera in portrait mode and really nothing else. Now of course, if you don't really care about the macro camera, then this is really not going to matter, and neither phone has an ultra wide camera, which is too bad. But overall, if you do like to get those close-up detailed images, then the Moto G Play will have an advantage. But other than that, when it comes to features, they're pretty much the same. Now as far as photo quality goes, I would say these phones are about the same. The Moto G Play might be a little bit better, but in general, I feel like the difference really isn't enough to change your overall experience. If you're someone who really likes to take a lot of pictures and you want a bunch of features and super nice photo quality and stuff like that, then even in this price range, there are definitely better options. But for more casual camera users, if you really just need a camera that's decent and kind of works, then the cameras we get with either phone will at least get the job done. Now, to give you an idea of what they can actually do, first, here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Play. In general, I feel like these pictures are pretty good, and for an occasional Instagram post, for example, I do think this phone will definitely get the job done. Now, here are some photos taken with the Moto G Pure, and again, I feel like there's really not a huge difference between the two, in general, when compared to phones that are not quite mid-range, but also not the lowest end. Something like the Samsung Galaxy A13 or the Moto G Power, some of those phones are going to be quite a bit better, but again, for really casual camera use, I do think either phone is going to be perfectly fine. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Moto G Play, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G37 processor. With the Moto G Pure, this phone is also getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G25. Now between the two, you're really not going to see a significant performance difference, and honestly, even for what they are, both phones are pretty slow, so if you're going to be on your phone a lot, you're probably going to want to go with something else. That being said though, of course, for more basic activities like web browsing, light social media use, and maybe watching a video every now and then, they will at least get the job done. But again, definitely don't get either phone expecting it to be very fast, because neither of them are. Now I did run benchmark tests on both phones using Geekbench 5, and here are the results I got. So again, in general, not really a significant difference here. Technically the Moto G Play did score a bit higher, but again, in general, when you're actually using the phones, you're not really going to see a huge difference. So overall, if you're going to be on your phone a lot, I would probably just get something else, because even when it comes to really affordable phones, there are phones like the Moto G Power, for example, that are pretty much going to be around the same price, but the Moto G Power is significantly faster. But that being said, of course, again, if you're doing really basic activities like really light web browsing, social media, and maybe watching a couple YouTube videos here and there, then in that case, either phone will be at least okay. Now for the batteries, with the Moto G Play, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 10 watt fast charging, and with the Moto G Pure, this phone has a 4000 mAh battery that also supports 10 watt fast charging. So clearly here, between the two, the Moto G Play does have quite an advantage, having a significantly larger battery. So if you do want the better battery life between the two, then I would definitely go with the Moto G Play. That being said though, with the Moto G Pure, surprisingly, for only having a 4000 mAh battery, which I guess isn't really small, but still, it's not really that big either. But with this phone, the battery life is actually surprisingly good. So honestly, if you do want good battery life, you're really not going to go wrong either way. But obviously, if you want the best battery life between the two, then the Moto G Play will have the advantage. As far as software goes, these phones currently both have Android 12. With the Moto G Play, it actually came with Android 12, and with the Moto G Pure, it did start out with Android 11, and it recently updated to it. I can't remember exactly when, but keep in mind there are some carriers that for whatever reason still don't have the update with this phone. So if you do have the Moto G Pure and you're stuck on Android 11, I'm not exactly sure why, but I have heard of that happening, so definitely keep this in mind. But in general, if you do care a bit more about the software, despite them having the same software right now, I would definitely go with the Moto G Play, because I feel like eventually this phone, seeing as it is a 2023 phone, should probably get Android 13, whereas with the Moto G Pure it might, but I'm personally not counting on it. Another thing to keep in mind here is that unfortunately, neither phone has NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you are going to have to get something else. Now, in this price range, I'm not really that surprised, but it is really too bad because at this point, with contactless mobile payment services becoming more and more widely used, I feel like in 2023, any phone should have NFC. But unfortunately for now, with these entry-level phones, really only a few phones in this price range have it, so seeing that these phones don't really isn't that much of a surprise. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, I feel like in almost every significant way, these phones are nearly interchangeable. That being said though, in every way where there's actually a difference, I would say the Moto G Play is a little bit better, despite having the exact same display, the same storage, roughly the same camera, and pretty much the same performance and features too. The Moto G Play does at least have a macro camera, and it does take slightly better photos in my opinion, although honestly it's not really that much of a difference. It also is a bit newer, so it's most likely going to get Android 13, whereas I kind of doubt the Moto G Pure will. We'll see, but still, it's $100-something phone that's like a year old, so I would be surprised to see this phone get Android 13, but who knows. Regardless though, if you really do care about the software, I still would get the Moto G Play, because most likely again, I'm almost completely sure this phone will get Android 13, whereas it's kind of questionable with the Moto G Pure. And then the Moto G Play also has a significantly larger battery too, and honestly a nicer design in general. So overall, assuming they're pretty much the same price, I would go with the Moto G Play. But honestly, if there's really a significant price difference, for example, maybe you can get the Moto G Pure for free, but the Moto G Play is going for full price, in that kind of situation, I would just go with the Moto G Pure, because even though technically the Moto G Play is the better device, I don't think the differences are really worth paying a whole lot of extra money for. So at the end of the day, if you really want to maximize the value and features you're getting, then the Moto G Play is technically a better device. Really, if you're looking for a super basic entry-level phone, you want a decent display, acceptable camera, and good battery life, but aside from that, you don't really care about extra features or anything like that, then overall, I do think either phone will get the job done just fine. But this concludes my comparison between the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 and the Motorola Moto G Pure. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about each of them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next one.